There is a certain kind of power that does not announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand to be noticed. It simply exists, calm, steady, undeniable. That is the power of silence. Most people think power comes from speech, from expression, from persuasion. But the truth is, the greatest strength a person can ever cultivate is the ability to be still when others are loud, to be centered when others are scattered, to be quiet when the world insists on noise. Your silence speaks for you in ways that words never can. It tells people who you are, what you value, and how deeply you understand life. When you stay silent in moments where others rush to fill the air with opinions, you reveal confidence. You show that you are not desperate to prove yourself. You have already proven enough. You show that you are in control, not just of your voice, but of your emotions, your reactions, and your peace. In every conversation, there is more said in the pauses than in the sentences. Silence gives words meaning. Without the pause, speech loses depth. Without stillness, sound loses form. And without silence, life loses reflection. When you are silent, you are not empty. You are listening, observing, absorbing. You are allowing wisdom to find its way to you before you choose to speak. That's the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is noise. Response is music. Reaction comes from ego. Response comes from awareness. The wise understand that silence is not weakness. It's control. It's the art of knowing that you don't have to fight every battle, explain every action, or answer every criticism. There is no need to chase understanding from those who are determined not to understand. Silence is your proof that you no longer seek validation from noise. It is your way of saying, I know who I am, and I don't need your agreement to feel certain. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because silence reveals truth. It makes people face themselves. In noise, you can hide behind distraction. In silence, you meet your own reflection. That's why people fill every quiet moment with chatter, entertainment, and opinion. Because they're afraid of what might rise in the stillness. But the person who learns to sit quietly, to dwell in silence without fear, has already reached a higher kind of strength. When you are silent, you start to hear the world differently. You begin to notice details others miss. The tone behind the words, the energy behind the gestures, the intention behind the action. You start to see that most people don't really listen. They only wait to reply. And that's why silence gives you an advantage. It sharpens your awareness, deepens your understanding, and protects you from the trap of reacting emotionally. Sometimes, silence is the best answer. Not because you don't have words, but because no words could possibly match the dignity of restraint. There will be times when someone will misunderstand you, misjudge you, even mock you. And you will be tempted to explain, to defend, to prove. But you must remember, every time you speak in desperation, you trade peace for approval. Every time you argue with noise, you lose a little of your stillness. Silence, in those moments, is the mark of someone who has already won the inner battle. Life has a way of testing whether you've learned to value silence. It sends you critics, it sends you gossip, it sends you people who try to draw you into chaos. But if you can stay calm through all that, if you can keep your composure when others expect you to explode, you have mastered something very few people ever do. Emotional discipline. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. True strength speaks through presence, not performance. Through calm, not chaos. Through silence, not sound. Think about nature. The ocean doesn't explain its waves. The mountains don't announce their height. The stars don't declare their beauty. They simply exist, and their silence says everything. The sun doesn't need to remind the world of its power. It just rises. That's the kind of quiet certainty you should aim for. The kind that doesn't need to convince anyone. The kind that simply is. There is a kind of silence that intimidates the insecure. When you refuse to argue, when you decline to participate in gossip, when you choose peace over drama, your silence exposes what others are still wrestling with. Your calmness becomes their mirror, and not everyone likes what they see in it. But that's not your concern. You're not here to adjust your peace to fit someone else's chaos. You're here to master yourself. The wise know when to speak and when to be silent. They don't waste words on those who aren't ready to hear. They don't spend energy trying to prove depth to shallow minds. They understand that silence is a language that only a few can interpret. It's the language of inner mastery, of patience, of knowing that the truth doesn't need to scream to be real. The truth simply stands and lets time prove it. You don't have to rush to respond to everything that happens in your life. Some things don't deserve your reaction. Some questions don't deserve your answer. Some people don't deserve your energy. Silence is how you tell the world, I'm choosing where to invest my spirit. You don't have to match someone's anger to show your strength. You don't have to outtalk them to prove your intelligence. You only need to remain centered, and silence is the root of that center. Your silence speaks of patience. It says you're not ruled by impulse. It says you trust timing more than pressure. It says you're grounded enough to let things unfold without forcing them. In a world obsessed with instant reactions, silence is rebellion. It's proof that you no longer move by chaos, but by clarity. The quiet ones see everything. They notice what is not said. They sense the energy before the words arrive. They understand that sometimes silence can cut deeper than any argument because it shows detachment, not from people, but from their power to disturb your peace. Silence says, I've outgrown this. Silence says, I understand more than I'm saying. Silence says, I'm saving my energy for something higher. The moment you learn to be silent in conflict, you'll start to see how easily noise collapses under its own weight. People expect resistance, they thrive on it. When you refuse to feed the fire dies. You don't have to fight every battle. Some are won by standing still. Some are won by refusing to play the game. Silence is also the birthplace of wisdom. Every deep realization you've ever had came in a quiet moment. Insight doesn't arrive in chaos, it visits you when the mind is still. When you stop speaking, you begin hearing the whispers of your own intuition. You start to hear what life has been trying to tell you all along. That inner voice grows louder in silence, but you have to be willing to stop long enough to listen. When you're quiet, you begin to see how much noise controls the world. People argue not to learn, but to be right. They post not to express, but to be seen. They fill every space with sound so they don't have to face the emptiness within. But those who embrace silence are no longer afraid of that emptiness, because they've discovered it's not empty at all. It's full of awareness, creativity, strength, and truth. Your silence can heal you. It can restore your balance, sharpen your perspective, and remind you of what truly matters. Sometimes you don't need advice, you need quiet. Sometimes you don't need answers, you need space to hear them forming. The world moves fast, but wisdom moves slow. You can't download clarity, you have to sit with it. You have to let it rise in stillness like dawn over the mountains. There is also silence in relationships. The silence of not replying to provocation. The silence of choosing peace over winning an argument. The silence of walking away when your presence is no longer valued. Those silences are sacred. They speak volumes. They say, I love myself enough to not engage in what drains me. They say, my peace is worth more than being right. They say, I've learned that not every storm deserves my energy. And then there's the silence that follows growth. When you stop needing to explain your journey. When you no longer justify your choices. When you no longer seek approval from those who never tried to understand. That silence is not emptiness, it's evolution. It's what happens when you've made peace with who you've become. You stop talking about it and start being it. Your silence is your strength in a noisy world. When others rush to defend themselves, you stand still. When others demand recognition, you quietly build. When others speak to be heard, you speak only to be understood. And if understanding doesn't come, you let silence finish the sentence. That kind of silence has gravity. It pulls respect without asking for it. It commands attention without effort. There will be moments when people mistake your silence for weakness, but that's only because they don't understand the discipline it takes to hold your tongue when your ego wants to speak. They don't see the power it takes to walk away when you could have stayed and argued. They don't understand that silence is not surrender. It's strategy. The strong don't waste energy proving strength. They use it to build more of it. Your silence can protect your dreams. The most sacred things in your life should not always be spoken aloud. Speak too soon and the energy scatters. Reveal too much and the seeds are stolen. There's wisdom in keeping some things private, in nurturing them quietly until they bloom. You don't owe the world your plans, you owe yourself your focus. Let your results speak the words you chose not to say. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's the purest form of it. It says, I know when to speak and when not to. It says, I'm not driven by reaction, but by intention. It says, I am in tune with something deeper than noise. When your silence carries peace, people feel it before you say a word. It changes the atmosphere. It softens the energy. It shows that you've done the work within. Every truly strong person you've ever met carries that kind of silence. The kind that says, I've been through enough to know I don't need to prove anything. The kind that doesn't need to fill space with noise to feel significant. They have seen enough storms, endured enough criticism, faced enough doubt, and now they've arrived at that sacred stillness where peace becomes louder than any argument. Your silence is not a wall, it's a mirror. It reflects your maturity, your understanding, your boundaries. It reflects how deeply you've learned that peace is not given. It's guarded. The one who keeps their peace has already conquered themselves. The one who holds their silence has already found their truth. The world will always try to pull you back into its noise. It will tempt you with arguments, distractions, and reactions. But your silence must be your anchor. Every time you choose silence over chaos, you grow. Every time you stay calm when provoked, you evolve. Every time you listen instead of react, you step closer to mastery. The journey to peace begins with a decision to stop letting noise rule your life. To stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. To stop giving away your power through reaction. To realize that silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to protect your spirit. There will come a day when your silence will speak for you more powerfully than your words ever could. When people will understand what you stood for not by what you said, but by what you didn't entertain. When your calmness will tell the story of every storm you survived. When your peace will tell the story of every battle you chose not to fight. So learn to be quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because not everything deserves to be said. Not every thought deserves air. Not every emotion deserves reaction. Some things are meant to dissolve in silence. Some truths are meant to be lived, not spoken. Some wisdom is meant to be carried quietly, like fire inside the soul. When you live with that kind of understanding, you stop rushing to fill the silence. You start cherishing it. Because it's in silence that clarity grows, that faith strengthens, that vision forms. The greatest transformations happen in quiet, when no one is watching, when no one is listening, when it's just you and the stillness. Your silence is a statement. It says you trust the process. It says you have matured beyond reaction. It says you are strong enough to let time reveal what words cannot. And in the end, the world will hear your silence, not as absence, but as presence. Not as emptiness, but as peace. Because silence, when grounded in strength, becomes the loudest voice of all. Not responding is often the most intelligent response. There's a wisdom in restraint that can't be taught in books or speeches. It's earned through experience, through pain, through the moments where you realize that reacting only made things worse. When you reach a certain level of understanding, you stop rushing to answer everything. You stop feeling the need to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You learn that silence isn't a lack of strength. It's the ultimate form of it. Because anyone can react, but it takes real discipline to pause, to breathe, and to say nothing at all. Most people live in reaction mode. Someone says something offensive, they respond instantly. Someone challenges them, they defend themselves. Someone misunderstands them, they start explaining. And every time they do, they give away a piece of their peace. But those who've tasted real self-control know the truth. You don't owe everyone an answer. You don't have to justify your every move. You don't have to lower yourself to the level of noise just to prove you can be heard. The most intelligent people often hold back their words, not because they're uncertain, but because they're selective. They understand that not everything deserves a reaction. Some comments are bait, some arguments are traps, and some conversations are designed only to drain energy. The wise know when to speak and when to walk away. They understand that silence can disarm arrogance faster than anger ever could. A calm face and quiet mind can cut through the chaos more effectively than the loudest voice in the room. You reach a turning point in life when you stop needing to respond to everything that offends you. You realize that people project their inner storms onto others, and their words say more about them than they ever could about you. When someone tries to provoke you, silence becomes your shield. When someone speaks from ignorance, silence becomes your wisdom. When someone attacks your peace, silence becomes your victory. Because not responding doesn't mean you lost. It means you refuse to lose yourself in the process. There's something powerful about a person who can stay quiet in chaos. Who can listen to an insult and not absorb it. Who can hear criticism and not react with emotion. That kind of composure comes from deep inner work, from understanding that your peace is not up for negotiation. You protect it not by fighting for it, but by choosing silence over reaction. You realize that not every action deserves your energy, not every opinion deserves your time, and not every situation deserves your presence. Not responding is not weakness. It's wisdom wrapped in restraint. It means you've learned the difference between what needs your attention and what only wants it. You've learned that responding to nonsense gives it power, while silence starves it of oxygen. You've learned that you don't have to prove your intelligence through debate. You prove it through calmness. You prove it by refusing to let small people pull you into small arguments. It's easy to be loud when you're angry. It's easy to defend yourself when you feel attacked. But it takes extraordinary control to sit in silence and let time speak for you. Because time always does. The truth has a way of surfacing when you stop trying to force it. The lies collapse under their own weight when you stay silent long enough. The intelligent response isn't always a spoken one. It's the patience to let things unfold naturally. When you don't respond, you're not giving up control. You're taking it back. You're refusing to let someone else dictate your emotions. You're showing that your peace doesn't depend on how others treat you. You've outgrown the need to react to everything that comes your way. And that's a form of maturity that very few ever reach. Because silence requires strength. It's not passive. It's powerful. It's the decision to act from clarity instead of chaos. The mind that's always reacting is never at peace. It's pulled in every direction, chasing every word, trying to win every argument. But the mind that can pause, observe, and choose silence, that mind is free. Freedom doesn't come from saying everything that crosses your mind. It comes from knowing when not to. The more you grow, the less you need to prove. The more peace you find, the less noise you make. The more you understand yourself, the less you feel the need to explain yourself to others. Sometimes, silence is the only language that arrogance understands. When someone can't get a reaction from you, they lose their power. When you stop feeding their need for drama, the fire dies out. Your silence frustrates those who thrive on conflict because it denies them the control they crave. They want you to react, to argue, to validate their chaos. When you don't, they're forced to sit with their own noise. That's why silence is so powerful. It exposes what people try to hide behind their words. When you choose not to respond, you protect your energy. You conserve your mental and emotional resources for what truly matters. You stop scattering your focus across every minor disturbance. You stop explaining your path to those who were never meant to walk it. You stop arguing with people who aren't listening. And in that stillness, you grow stronger. You start to notice how much of life's noise is meaningless. How many of the battles you once fought were fueled by pride, not purpose. Not responding doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care too much about your inner peace to let it be disturbed by every external wave. It means you've learned to separate what deserves your voice from what deserves your silence. You've learned that silence can say more than any defense ever could. You've learned that the one who controls their reaction controls the direction of the moment. There is great intelligence in knowing the value of restraint. It's the art of choosing your words wisely, of letting silence carry the weight of your wisdom. Because not every truth needs to be spoken, not every thought needs to be shared, and not every emotion needs to be expressed. Some truths are better lived quietly. Some lessons are better observed than argued. Some peace is better kept than explained. When you rise above reaction, you begin to live from response. And the difference is everything. Reaction comes from impulse. Response comes from awareness. Reaction is driven by emotion. Response is guided by understanding. When you choose silence, you're choosing response over reaction. You're choosing to rise above the noise instead of being pulled into it. It's a kind of mastery that few understand. The ability to feel deeply and still remain silent. To know the truth and still choose peace. To see the provocation and still stay calm. This kind of silence isn't empty. It's full of clarity. It's the sound of someone who knows that not every action deserves a reaction. It's the sound of someone who has learned that dignity is louder than defense. In life, you'll face moments where your silence will be tested. People will provoke you, misunderstand you, and push you to break your composure. And that's when you'll discover who you really are. Because silence under pressure reveals character. It shows whether you are ruled by emotion or anchored by wisdom. When you can remain quiet while chaos unfolds, you've reached a level of peace that no one can take from you. Not responding is the ultimate act of emotional intelligence. It says, I choose my battles. It says, I refuse to be controlled by your energy. It says, I will not let your storm drown my stillness. When you stay silent in moments that demand reaction, you are practicing mastery over yourself. You're proving that you've learned the most important skill of all, to remain at peace no matter what surrounds you. So learn to pause. Learn to breathe before you respond. Learn to see that silence is not the absence of thought, but the presence of control. The more you master this, the more life begins to flow in your favor. You stop being pulled into pointless arguments. You stop being drained by unnecessary noise. You stop fighting battles that don't move you forward. And slowly, you begin to see that the person who can remain silent in the face of chaos is the one who truly understands the language of wisdom. Your silence can speak the language of self-respect. There comes a moment in life when you realize that you no longer have to shout to be heard, you no longer have to prove your worth to anyone, and you no longer have to explain your decisions to people who never took the time to understand your journey. Silence becomes your voice. It becomes your declaration that you know your value, and you refuse to waste it where it's not appreciated. Self-respect doesn't always look like standing tall and speaking loudly. Sometimes it looks like walking away quietly. Sometimes it's the quiet confidence that says, I won't lower myself to match your chaos. Sometimes it's the unspoken boundary that says, my peace matters more than your validation. When you respect yourself deeply, you learn that silence can say more than 1,000 words. It says, I'm no longer available for disrespect. It says, I know my worth even if you don't. It says, you no longer have access to my energy. It's the kind of silence that doesn't come from fear or weakness, but from dignity. It's not about holding back. It's about standing firm in who you are without needing to convince anyone else to see it. There's power in not responding when someone tries to provoke you. There's power in not explaining why you walked away. There's power in not defending your boundaries. That silence is not emptiness. It's self-respect in motion. It's saying, I don't need to justify my peace. It's knowing that your energy is sacred and you get to decide who receives it. You understand that people who truly value you will never put you in positions that force you to disrespect yourself to keep them around. So you stay quiet, not because you're passive, but because you've already chosen yourself. The person who respects themselves doesn't chase closure. They create it through silence. They don't beg to be understood. They stand in understanding of themselves. They don't explain what peace costs. They pay it and move forward. Because when you know who you are, you no longer have to announce it. You embody it. Your silence carries the message clearly. I respect myself too much to argue about my worth. The more you grow, the quieter you become. You stop needing to prove yourself in every room. You stop feeling the need to respond to every comment. You stop trying to please everyone. That's not arrogance. It's maturity. You've learned that your energy is currency, and not everyone can afford your time. Your silence becomes a filter. It separates what deserves your attention from what doesn't. It's the pause that protects your peace. It's the calm that guards your dignity. Self-respect doesn't shout. It simply stands. It doesn't demand recognition. It commands it through presence. People can feel it in your silence, the way you hold yourself, the way you choose not to respond to drama, the way you protect your energy without explanation. It's a quiet authority, a sense of self that doesn't need validation. That's what silence becomes when it's rooted in respect. It becomes a form of communication that speaks louder than any argument ever could. When you start respecting yourself, you stop explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for saying no. You stop feeling guilty for choosing peace over chaos. You understand that silence is not withdrawal. It's preservation. It's protecting your inner space from the energy that tries to invade it. You've learned that every response is an investment, and not every situation is worth your emotional currency. Sometimes silence is the only response that carries weight. When someone disrespects you, silence says, you no longer have access to this version of me. When someone underestimates you, silence says, you'll see in time. When someone gossips about you, silence says, my truth doesn't need defense. And when someone tries to provoke you, silence says, you don't control my peace. That is self-respect translated into quiet action. Your silence becomes your statement of standards. It shows what you tolerate and what you don't. It shows that you won't engage in what drains you. It shows that you value your emotional energy too much to spend it on what doesn't bring growth. And the people who once thrived on your reaction will start to feel the shift. They'll realize that your silence isn't confusion. It's conclusion. It's you closing a chapter without saying a word. There's a reason the most peaceful people are often the quietest. They've learned that energy is sacred and reaction is expensive. They've learned that silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care wisely. You no longer rush to defend your truth, because truth doesn't need defenders. You no longer react to disrespect, because respect is something you give yourself first. You no longer seek validation from others, because you've already found it within. Your silence also teaches others how to treat you. When you stop entertaining certain conversations, people start realizing what you no longer allow. When you stop explaining your worth, people start seeing it. When you stop giving access to those who misuse it, people start respecting your boundaries. Silence in this way becomes a teacher. It communicates your standards without confrontation. It teaches others that your energy is not to be taken lightly. There's peace in knowing that you don't have to respond to everything that challenges you. You don't have to prove that you're right, that you're strong, or that you're capable. Your silence already says it. It says, I trust my truth. It says, I've learned that peace is more powerful than reaction. It says, I don't need to speak to be understood. That's what self-respect sounds like when it finds its voice through silence. When you operate from self-respect, your silence is not cold. It's clear. It's not distance. It's direction. You're simply redirecting your energy toward growth instead of conflict. You're choosing to water your peace instead of feeding negativity. You're choosing to honor your boundaries instead of defending them. You're choosing to rise quietly instead of arguing loudly. Some people will misinterpret your silence as pride. Others will call it avoidance. But the ones who understand self-respect will recognize it instantly. They'll feel the strength in your quietness, the depth in your calm, and the confidence in your restraint. Because silence that comes from self-respect carries a certain frequency. It's grounded, steady, unshakable. It doesn't come from fear. It comes from certainty. The way you respond to disrespect defines your level of self-respect. Some people respond with anger, some with revenge, but those rooted in self-worth respond with silence. Because silence doesn't fuel the situation. It dissolves it. You realize that you can't change someone's perception by arguing. You can only show them who you are by how you carry yourself. And nothing communicates strength more clearly than refusing to participate in your own disrespect. Self-respect is not loud, it's deliberate. It's the decision to walk away rather than explain yourself to someone who's already made up their mind. It's the choice to protect your energy rather than waste it on those who don't value it. It's the ability to be misunderstood and still remain at peace. And silence becomes the natural language of that mindset. It's how you say, I know my worth, and I'm not negotiating it. You begin to notice that silence has a way of shifting everything. The moment you stop reacting, people start listening differently. The moment you stop explaining, people start observing. The moment you stop engaging, energy begins to realign.